Welcome back, focused learners. Let's jump straight into today's explainer. We are unpacking a truly fascinating source text today, one that gets right to the absolute core of how we live our lives. We're looking at a concept called the hierarchy of liberty and the architecture of control. We talk a lot about freedom, but usually we just mean having the choice between 50 different streaming services on a Friday night. Well, this text challenges us to look past that surface-level stuff and ask what that word actually means in practice. It argues that freedom isn't just a simple on or off switch, but a really complex structure that influences literally everything, from our daily habits all the way up to the fabric of society.
So, before we get into the mechanics of how this works, let's ask a pretty provocative question. Are we truly free or just comfortably distracted? It's a bit of a cold open hook, I know, but it's essential for understanding the text we're analyzing today. We so often equate having endless choices of entertainment or endless goods to buy with being totally free. But the source material asks us to really challenge our baseline assumptions here. Does having a million shows to stream or infinite things to buy actually represent ultimate liberty? Or does it serve a completely different purpose entirely?
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The hierarchy of freedom, the 3 levels of liberty. The core argument here is that freedom is not just one monolithic thing. Rather, it's a layered hierarchy. It's essentially a staircase, so let's walk right up the steps as outlined by the source. Step 1, down at the foundation, is unrestricted access. This is a very materialistic, kind of hedonistic view of freedom. It's the ability to acquire anything you desire without limitation. Think one-click shopping, endless doom scrolling, or just avoiding burnout by indulging in life's immediate pleasures. Moving up to step 2, we find pursuing passion and meaning. This is a much more internal, purpose-driven freedom. It's not about what you can get, but what you can do. It's the autonomy to dedicate your time to real passions, like volunteering in your community or spending years mastering a complex craft. Finally, at the absolute peak, we have step 3, moral and ethical choice. The text frames this as the most profound, self-regulated form of freedom. It's the freedom to choose what is right, even when faced with immense pressure to do otherwise. We're talking about whistleblowing on corporate corruption or standing up for an unpopular truth. This tier isn't about what you can do, it's about what you ought to do. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between the bottom of that hierarchy and the top. On one side, we have external freedom. This represents that first tier of unrestricted access. It is highly dependent on your wealth, your resources, and entirely external factors. Plus, it only really provides temporary relief. Actually, it's pretty ironic when you think about it. We often work ourselves to the bone just to afford the external freedoms we use to de-stress from that exact same work. On the flip side, we have internal freedom, representing those upper tiers. This kind of liberty doesn't care about your bank account at all. It is entirely dependent on your character, your internal strength, and your personal integrity. While external freedom offers a quick dopamine hit, internal freedom offers lasting fulfillment. And the text argues that this is exactly what makes moral and ethical freedom the highest and most substantial form of liberty.
Moving on to Section 2, the architecture of control, weaponizing the lowest tier.
Let's read a quote directly from the source material here, because it really forms the absolute crux of their sociological argument. A populace preoccupied with entertainment, consumer goods, and immediate gratification is less likely to engage in critical thinking, collective action, or political dissent. So the analysis suggests that when people are entirely focused on chasing that next pleasure, or, stressing out trying to pay off their latest purchase, they enter a state of passive compliance. And from a systemic standpoint, this state of passive compliance is incredibly useful for authorities looking to minimize challenges to their agendas.
So what does a society structured around this lowest tier actually look like in practice? The text points to several specific, systemic outcomes of all this immediate gratification: less critical thinking, lower political dissent, and reduced collective action. And why does this happen? The answer boils down to decreased mental bandwidth. If your brain is completely tapped out from endless entertainment or financial stress, you quite literally lack the bandwidth to organize, dissent, or even question the status quo. You might feel free because you can buy whatever you want, but you are effectively sidelined from engaging in the higher, far more demanding forms of meaningful freedom.
Which brings us to Section 3, our psychological vulnerability, the mirror of human nature. To fully understand this dynamic, the text turns the lens right back on ourselves, grounding its philosophical argument in hard psychology. Leaders and systems of power aren't necessarily creating a brand new problem out of thin air. Rather, they are exploiting a pre-existing weakness. It's known as present bias. This is the inherent psychological desire for instant gratification and quick results. It's a deeply ingrained human tendency to value a smaller reward right now over a much larger, more meaningful reward in the future. It's the exact reason why we choose the immediate joy of eating a donut over the long-term goal of a healthy diet, or why we binge a new show instead of getting a full night's sleep. Simply put, it is our natural vulnerability.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the supply side of the equation. Governments, corporations, massive media outlets, and algorithms, they understand this present bias perfectly. They know human psychology inside and out. Therefore, they structure their offerings to intentionally cater to these shallow desires. They provide the unrestricted access to instant pleasure because they know exactly how well it works to capture our attention and our resources. And, of course, that perfectly aligns with the demand. A significant portion of the population naturally gravitates toward immediate gratification because of those inherent human desires we just defined. So this isn't just a top-down control mechanism forced upon a totally unwilling public. It creates a self-perpetuating cycle. We keep running on the hamster wheel, chasing the immediate dopamine hit, while the supply perfectly meets our demand. And that keeps everyone locked safely into that lowest tier of the freedom hierarchy.
All right, Section 4, Society's Great Hypocrisy, the Illusion of Empowerment. This is where we peel back the final layer of the onion, revealing a massive gap between lip service and reality. The text notes that our systems constantly broadcast high ideals, paying intense lip service to concepts like freedom of speech, the pursuit of happiness, and individual liberty. However, the reality is sharply different. In practice, the argument goes, these very same systems create environments that breed docile consumerism. They actually make it structurally and psychologically incredibly difficult for people to exercise those higher, meaningful forms of freedom, like the freedom to pursue excellence, to live ethically, or to engage in truly independent thought. So, to wrap up the analysis, the source material leaves us with a wonderfully nuanced summary of this complex interplay. It's absolutely crucial to understand that there is no single culprit here. It's not a comic book villain plotting in a smoky boardroom. Instead, it's a dynamic interplay between the interests of those in power and the psychological tendencies of the populace. It exploits human nature, and in doing so, it subtly discourages true empowerment. The system works so flawlessly because it gives us exactly what our biology craves rather than what our intellect actually values.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to end today's explainer. Based on the hierarchy we've just explored, are you exercising your highest moral freedom? Or are you just buying your next distraction? Next time you feel the urge to simply consume, to take the path of least resistance, or to avoid a tough ethical challenge, think back to those 3 tiers of liberty. Remember that true, lasting freedom isn't found in what you can acquire, but in the strength of the choices you make. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Focus learners, keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.